The blood on her deerskin dress had dried dark and stiff by the time she collapsed against the cottonwood tree, her vision swimming as the Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail 5 miles outside Montana City, Montana, in the summer of 1878. Talise Foster, though she had been born Talise of the Chiricahua Apache and knew no settler surname until much later, pressed her hand against the bullet wound in her side and felt the warm seep of fresh blood between her fingers. She had been riding hard for 2 days since the attack, since the cavalry patrol had fired on her small hunting party without warning, since she had watched her cousin fall from his horse, and known she could not stop to help him without dying herself. Now her stolen mare lay dead a half-mile back, shot out from under her by men who never even showed their faces, and Talise had stumbled forward on foot until her legs finally gave out beneath her. She closed her eyes against the spinning world and tried to remember the healing songs her grandmother had taught her, but the words scattered like autumn leaves every time she grasped for them. The wound burned like fire in her side, and she knew enough about such injuries to understand that without help, she would not see another sunrise. She was 19 years old and had survived so much already: the forced relocations, the broken treaties, the constant fear that soldiers would come in the night, but this seemed like an ending she could not escape. Her breathing came shallow and quick, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Talise tried to move to hide herself in the brush, but her body refused to obey. She managed to open her eyes and saw a rider coming up the trail, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sky. Her hand went to the knife at her belt, though she doubted she had the strength to use it. If this was another soldier come to finish what the others had started, at least it would be quick. She waited, her fingers wrapped around the horn handle of her blade as the rider drew closer. The man who dismounted and approached her was not wearing a cavalry uniform. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 20s, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that fell to his collar beneath a worn hat. He carried himself like someone who knew how to handle trouble but was not looking for it, and when he caught sight of her huddled against the tree, he stopped short and raised both hands to show they were empty. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, his voice steady and low. "I can see you are injured. Will you let me help?" Talise stared at him, trying to read his intentions in his face. He had gray eyes that reminded her of storm clouds, and there was no cruelty in them that she could detect. Still, she had learned the hard way not to trust easily. "Why?" She managed to rasp out in English, a language she spoke better than most white people expected. "Because you are hurt and alone, and leaving you here would be the same as killing you myself." He took a cautious step closer, moving slowly like he was approaching a wounded animal. "My name is Randall Lawson. I work cattle for the Double Bar Ranch. I am riding back from delivering a message to Fort Benson when I saw you. That wound needs tending." "I am Apache," Talise said, as if that should explain why he should ride on and leave her to her fate. "Your people do not help mine." "I am not my people," Randall said simply. "I am just one man, and right now one man is all you have got. So what is it going to be? You can trust me and maybe live, or you can send me away and definitely die. I know which one I would choose, but the decision is yours." Talise looked at him for a long moment, weighing her options. Pain lanced through her side with every breath, and she could feel her strength ebbing with each passing minute. She thought of her mother, dead from fever 3 winters past. She thought of her father, killed by prospectors when she was 12. She thought of all the reasons she had to hate white men, and then she thought about how desperately she wanted to live. Finally, she let her hand fall away from her knife. "Help me," she whispered, and then the world went dark. When Talise opened her eyes again, she was lying on her back looking up at a canvas ceiling. It took her several confused seconds to realize she was inside a tent, and several more to remember how she had gotten there. The last thing she recalled clearly was Randall Lawson's face hovering above hers, his hands pressing something against her side as he lifted her with surprising gentleness. She tried to sit up and immediately gasped as pain shot through her torso. "Easy now," came Randall's voice from somewhere to her left. "You are going to tear the stitches if you move too sudden." Talise turned her head and saw him sitting on a wooden crate near the tent entrance, a tin cup of coffee in his hands. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, and she realized with a start that he must have been awake through the night tending to her. Outside, she could hear the sounds of a town waking up, voices calling to each other, wagon wheels creaking, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. "Where am I?" she asked, her throat dry and rough. "Montana City." "I have a room at the boarding house, but I could not exactly carry you through the front door without causing a stir, so I pitched this tent at the edge of town on a piece of land the owner lets me use sometimes." He took a sip of his coffee and regarded her steadily. "I cleaned your wound and stitched it up as best I could. The bullet went clean through, which is good nothing to dig out. But you lost a lot of blood and the wound was starting to fester. I have been changing the dressing and keeping it clean, but you are going to need rest and food to heal proper." Talise processed this information slowly. She was lying on what appeared to be a bedroll, covered with a wool blanket despite the summer heat. Her dress had been removed, and she wore a man's shirt that was far too large for her, buttoned up to her throat. She could feel bandages wrapped tight around her middle beneath the fabric. "You undressed me," she said, and it was not quite an accusation but close. "I did what was necessary to tend your wound," Randall said evenly. "I tried to be respectful about it. Your dress is over there, cleaned and mended as best I could manage." He gestured to where her deerskin dress hung over a rope line strung between two tent poles. "I am no seamstress, but I figured it was better than nothing." Despite herself, Talise felt a flicker of something that might have been gratitude. She was not used to kindness from white men, and she did not quite know what to do with it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "What do you want from me?" "I do not want anything from you," Randall said, and he sounded weary, as if he had expected the question but wished he had not had to answer it. "Look, I know you have got no reason to trust me. I know what has been done to your people, and I know I probably look just like every other white man who has caused you harm. But I am not asking you to trust me forever. I am just asking you to let me help until you are well enough to go wherever it is you mean to go. After that, we never have to see each other again." Talise studied him carefully, looking for deception in his face and finding none. He was young. She realized probably not more than 22 or 23, and there was an openness to his features that suggested he had not yet learned to hide what he felt. She did not sense any threat from him, which both relieved and confused her. In her experience, white men always wanted something. "How long have I been here?" she asked finally. 2 days. "You have been in and out, mostly out. Had a fever the first night that scared me pretty good, but it broke yesterday afternoon." He set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You said some things in your own language while you were fevered. I did not understand the words, but it sounded like you were dreaming about someone. Someone you lost, maybe." Talise felt her chest tighten. She had no memory of fever dreams, but she could guess what she might have said. "My cousin," she said softly. "He was shot when I was shot. I left him there. I did not even try to help him." "If you had tried, you would be dead too," Randall said with simple certainty. "Sometimes the only way to honor the people we lose is to stay alive ourselves." There was something in the way he said it that made Talise think he was speaking from experience. She wanted to ask, but exhaustion was pulling at her again, dragging her back down into darkness. "I need to sleep," she mumbled, her eyelids already closing. "Then sleep," Randall said quietly. "I will be here when you wake." And he was. Over the following days, as Talise slowly regained her strength, Randall was a constant presence. He brought her water and broth, and later, when her stomach could handle it, real food, beans and cornbread, and occasionally a bit of meat. He changed her bandages twice a day with gentle, practiced hands, and though it clearly made them both uncomfortable, he never said or did anything improper. He treated her wound with a salve he said a Mexican woman in town had sold him, and whatever was in it seemed to work because the angry red inflammation began to fade, and the wound itself started to close clean. They did not talk much at first. Talise was too weak and too wary, and Randall seemed to understand that silence was easier for her than conversation. But as the days passed and she grew stronger, she found herself watching him when he thought she was asleep, studying this strange man who had saved her life for no reason she could fathom. He would sit at the tent entrance in the evenings, looking out at the darkening sky, and sometimes she could see a sadness in his face that he did not carry during the day. On the fifth evening, when he brought her a plate of stew from the boarding house kitchen, Talise finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why did you really stop to help me? You could have ridden past. No one would have known." Randall was quiet for a moment, sitting on his usual crate with his own plate balanced on his knee. "I would have known," he said at last. "And I guess I have seen too much of people riding past when they should have stopped. My mother died when I was 15. She got sick with something the doctor could not fix, just wasted away over the course of a winter. My father took it hard, started drinking, and could not seem to stop. One night he got thrown from his horse on the way home from the saloon. Broke his leg, bad compound fracture with the bone sticking out. He was lying in the road not 100 yards from town, calling for help, and 3 different men rode past him before someone finally stopped." Talise absorbed this quietly. Did he live? He lived. But he lost the leg, and he never really forgave those men for leaving him there. He died 2 years later, infection from a cut that should not have killed him, but by then he had given up on living anyway. Randall pushed a piece of meat around his plate with his fork. "So when I saw you there against that tree, bleeding and alone, I thought about my father lying in that road. I thought about what kind of man rides past someone who needs help, and I decided I did not want to be that kind of man." "I am sorry about your parents," Talise said, and meant it. "I am sorry about your cousin," Randall replied, "and whoever else you have lost. I imagine it has been a lot more than I can guess." "Yes," Talise said simply, because there was no point in elaborating. The list of people she had lost was long and painful, and speaking their names aloud would not bring them back. They ate in companionable silence for a while, and then Randall asked, "What is your name?" "I have been calling you Miss in my head, but that seems too formal for someone whose life I saved." Talise hesitated. Names had power, and giving hers to this white cowboy felt like crossing a line she could not uncross. But he had crossed lines for her too, had risked his reputation and possibly his safety by helping her. "Talise," she said finally, "it means beautiful water." "Talise," Randall repeated, testing the sound of it. "That is a good name, suits you." She felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the dim light inside the tent that hid her reaction. "What about Randall? Does that mean something?" "Not that I know of. My mother liked the sound of it, I guess. She never said." He smiled slightly. "You can call me Rand if you want. Most folks do." "Rand," Talise said and nodded. "Thank you for helping me, Rand. I know I have not said it before, but I am saying it now. You saved my life." "You are welcome," Rand said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made something in Talise's chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with her wound. As the second week began, Talise was strong enough to sit up for long periods and even to stand with support. Rand helped her take short walks around the inside of the tent, his arms steady around her waist as she relearned the feeling of her own legs beneath her. The wound was healing well, and though it still pulled and ached if she moved wrong, it no longer felt like it might kill her. She caught sight of herself in a small mirror Rand had propped against his saddle bags and barely recognized the woman looking back gaunt and hollow-eyed, her long black hair tangled despite Rand's attempts to help her comb it. "I look terrible," she said without meaning to. "You look alive," Rand corrected from where he was reorganizing his supplies in the corner. "Everything else will come back with time." Talise set the mirror down and watched him work. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of someone who had learned to take care of himself young, and she found herself curious about him in ways that both intrigued and alarmed her. She had spent so much of her life being taught to fear and distrust white men that actually liking one felt like a betrayal of everyone she had lost. But Rand made it difficult to maintain that wall of distrust. He was patient and kind without being condescending, respectful without being distant. He talked to her like a person, not like a problem to be solved or a threat to be contained. "What will you do?" Rand asked one afternoon as he helped her back to the bedroll after a walk. "When you are healed, I mean. Do you have people you can go to?" Talise considered the question. Her band had been scattered, some sent to the reservation and others fled to Mexico. Her immediate family was gone. She had distant cousins somewhere, but she did not know if they were alive or where they might be. "I am not sure," she admitted. "I have been moving from place to place, trying to stay away from the soldiers and the reservation. I do not want to go there. I have heard what it is like." Rand nodded slowly. "I have heard things too, none of them good." He hesitated, then said carefully, "You could stay here. In Montana City, I mean. It is not perfect nowhere is, but it is growing and there is work if you know where to look. I could help you get settled, help you find something." "Stay here," Talise repeated, startled. "Rand, I am Apache. People would not accept me." "Some would not," Rand agreed. "But some might surprise you. There is a Mexican family that runs a restaurant, and they employ anyone willing to work hard. There is a Crow woman who married a prospector and runs a boarding house, different tribe, I know, but she might be sympathetic. And there are enough decent folks in town that if you had someone vouching for you, you would have a chance." He met her eyes. "I would vouch for you, if you wanted to try." Talise stared at him, trying to understand why he would offer such a thing. Why would you do that for me?" Rand shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "Because everyone deserves a chance to build a life. Because you are smart and strong and it would be a waste for you to spend the rest of your days just trying to survive. And because—" he stopped, seeming to rethink his words. "Because I would like to think that if our situations were reversed, you would do the same for me." "I would," Talise said, surprising herself with how quickly and certainly the words came. "If you were hurt and alone, I would help you." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that went deeper than gratitude or obligation. Rand looked away first, clearing his throat roughly. "Well then, think about it at least. You do not have to decide now." But Talise found herself thinking about it constantly over the days that followed. The idea of staying in one place, of not always running and hiding, had an appeal she had not felt in years. And if she was honest with herself, the idea of staying near Rand had an appeal too, though she was not ready to examine that feeling too closely. He had become familiar to her in the way that only happens when someone sees you at your most vulnerable and does not flinch away. She had let him see her weak and frightened and in pain, and he had treated her with nothing but gentleness. That was not a small thing. By the end of the third week, Talise was well enough to dress herself and walk without assistance. Her wound had healed to a puckered pink scar that would probably never fully fade, but the danger had passed. She stood outside the tent for the first time since Rand had brought her there, feeling the Montana sun on her face and the wind in her hair, and felt a fierce joy at simply being alive. Rand stood a few feet away, giving her space, and when she turned to look at him, she saw him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing. Just glad to see you on your feet." He gestured toward the town, visible as a collection of wooden buildings about a quarter-mile away. "You feel up to taking a walk into Montana City proper? I thought maybe we could get you some supplies, some proper clothes. That shirt of mine is not exactly fitting for a lady." Talise looked down at herself. She had been alternating between Rand's oversized shirt and her repaired deerskin dress, neither of which was particularly practical for daily wear. "I have no money," she pointed out. "Consider it a loan. You can pay me back when you are working." He said it casually, as if he had already decided she was staying, and Talise felt a flutter of something like hope in her chest. "All right," she agreed. "Let us go." Walking into Montana City at Rand's side was one of the stranger experiences of Talise's life. She was acutely aware of the stairs. They drew a white cowboy and an Apache woman side by side, and she kept her chin high and her eyes forward, refusing to show any of the anxiety that churned in her stomach. Rand seemed unbothered by the attention, nodding greetings to people he knew and ignoring the ones who whispered behind their hands. He took her first to a general store run by a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Shepherd, who looked Talise up and down with sharp eyes, but did not say anything rude. "She needs some clothes that fit proper," Rand explained. "A couple of dresses, undergarments, sturdy boots if you have them in her size, whatever else a woman needs." Mrs. Shepherd nodded slowly. "I can do that. Going to take some time, though. Most of my ready-made dresses will be too large for her. She is a bit of a slip." "We will wait," Rand said, and proceeded to lean against the counter while Mrs. Shepherd led Talise to a back room to take measurements and show her the available fabrics. "Your man is devoted, Mrs. Shepherd observed as she wrapped a measuring tape around Talise's waist. "Not many would do what he has done for you. People talk, you know." "He is not my man," Talise said automatically. "He is just someone who helped me." Mrs. Shepherd did not sound convinced. "Well, whatever he is paying good money for you to have decent clothes. That is worth something." She held up two bolts of fabric, one a practical brown cotton and the other a softer blue. "Which do you prefer?" Talise hesitated, then pointed to the blue. She had spent so much of her life in earth tones and practical garments that the idea of wearing something pretty felt almost frivolous. But Mrs. Shepherd nodded approvingly and set to work. And 2 hours later, Talise emerged from the back room wearing a simple blue dress that actually fit her, with a second dress wrapped in brown paper under her arm. Rand's face, when he saw her, made something warm bloom in her chest. "You look nice," he said, and then seemed to realize how inadequate the words were. "I mean, you always looked fine, but that dress is better than my old shirt." "Thank you," Talise said, smoothing her hands down the skirt. She felt strange in the settler clothing, like she was wearing a costume, but she had to admit it was comfortable and well made. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking through town, with Rand pointing out various establishments and introducing her to people he thought might be helpful. True to his word, he took her to the Mexican restaurant, where the owner, Senora Morales, looked at Talise with sympathy and told her in accented English that if she ever needed work, there was always washing and cooking to be done. They stopped by the boarding house run by the Crow woman, whose name was Sarah Brightwing, and she welcomed Talise with surprising warmth. "It is hard being a native woman in a white town," Sarah said bluntly, pouring them both coffee in her kitchen while Rand waited outside. "But it is not impossible. You have to be twice as good and work twice as hard, and even then some people will never see past your skin. But others will give you a chance if you prove you are worth it. Rand tells me you are tough and smart. If that is true, you will make it." "I am both those things," Talise confirmed. "I have had to be." "Good." Sarah smiled, and it was fierce. "You are welcome here anytime. I mean that. You need a place to stay for a night, you need advice, you need someone to talk to who understands, you come find me." Talise felt tears prick at her eyes unexpectedly. She had not realized how much she had missed having women to talk to, people who understood her experience. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." By the time she and Rand walked back to the tent that evening, Talise felt exhausted but hopeful in a way she had not felt in a very long time. She had supplies now, connections, the beginnings of a possibility that she could actually build something here. And she had Rand, who had given her all of this without asking for anything in return. "You are quiet," Rand observed as they picked their way along the rutted path in the gathering dusk. "Too much too soon." "No," Talise said. "I am just thinking about staying, about trying to make this work." She glanced at him. "You really meant what you said about vouching for me?" "I really meant it." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I like having you around, Talise. I know that probably sounds strange given we have only known each other a few weeks, but it is true. You are good company. And I think you could be happy here if you let yourself try." "I think I could too," Talise admitted. They had reached the tent and she turned to face him in the fading light. "I want to try, I want to stay." Rand's smile was bright and genuine. "Good, that is real good. We will figure it out together." And they did. Over the following weeks, Talise began to build a life in Montana City. She took work at Senora Morales's restaurant, washing dishes and helping in the kitchen, and discovered she had a talent for cooking that surprised everyone, including herself. The work was hard but honest, and she liked the feeling of earning her own money, of being able to pay Rand back for the clothes and supplies he had bought her. She rented a small room at Sarah Brightwing's boarding house, grateful for the independence but also for the friendship Sarah offered. Rand remained a constant in her life. He stopped by the restaurant most days for coffee, sitting at the corner table and talking to her during her breaks. On Sundays, when the restaurant was closed and he did not have work at the ranch, they would go walking together out along the creek or up into the hills that surrounded Montana City. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. And Talise found herself looking forward to these outings with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. Because somewhere along the way, between the wound healing and the life building and the quiet conversations, Talise had fallen in love with Randall Lawson. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just the natural attachment that came from him saving her life, but she knew it was deeper than that. She loved the way he listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered. She loved his quiet strength and his unexpected moments of humor. She loved the way he looked at her like she was someone precious, someone worth protecting. She loved him, and she had no idea if he felt the same way. Summer faded into autumn, and the Montana air grew crisp and cool. Talise had been in Montana City for 4 months now, and it had started to feel like home in a way nowhere had since she was a child. She had friends, she had work, she had a place to sleep at night that felt safe. And she had Rand, who remained stubbornly present in her life even though there was no reason for him to be any more. She was healed. She was independent. He could have walked away at any point, but he never did. One Sunday in late October, they were walking along the creek when Rand suddenly stopped and turned to face her. His expression was serious, and Talise felt her heart skip in her chest. "Talise, I need to tell you something," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I have been trying to figure out the right words for weeks now, but there is no perfect way to say this, so I am just going to say it plain. I am in love with you. I think I have been since that day I saw you standing outside the tent with the sun on your face, looking so happy to be alive. Maybe even before that. And I know this is complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why this is a bad idea, but I could not go another day without telling you how I feel." Talise stared at him, her mind reeling. She had hoped, but she had not let herself truly believe that he might feel the same way she did. "Rand," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything back," Rand continued quickly. "I just needed you to know, and if you do not feel the same way, that is all right. I will still be your friend. I will still be there if you need me. But if there is any chance that you might feel something for me too, then I am asking, can I court you proper? Can I take you to dinner and dances and all the things a man does when he wants to win a woman's heart? Because, Talise, I want to win your heart. I want it more than I have ever wanted anything." Talise felt tears slide down her cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "You already won my heart, Rand. You won it when you stopped to help me when no one else would have. You won it every time you changed my bandages and brought me food and sat with me so I would not be afraid. You won it on all those Sunday walks and in all those quiet conversations. I love you too. I have for a while now." Rand's face transformed, joy lighting him up from within. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. "You mean that? You really mean that?" "I really mean it," Talise confirmed, and then Rand was pulling her close, wrapping his arms around her and holding her like she was something infinitely valuable. Talise pressed her face against his chest and listened to the steady thump of his heart and felt, for the first time in years, completely safe. When they finally pulled back, Rand cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with such tenderness it made her breath catch. "Can I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Yes," Talise whispered, and when his lips met hers it felt like coming home. The courtship that followed was sweet and careful and utterly proper, because Rand was determined to do things right. He took her to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Montana City, where the owner seated them in a corner and pretended not to notice the disapproving looks from some of the other patrons. He bought her flowers from the widow who kept a garden, bright autumn blooms that Talise arranged in a jar in her boarding house room. He walked her home every evening after her shift at Senora Morales's restaurant, holding her hand and stealing kisses in the shadows. Not everyone approved. There were people in Montana City who made their displeasure known, who muttered about race mixing and impropriety and all manner of ugly things. But there were also people who surprised Talise with their support misses. Shepard from the general store, who always had a kind word and a smile, the banker, Mr. Peterson, who tipped his hat respectfully when he passed them on the street. Even the sheriff, a gruff man named Tom Warren, who told Rand straight out that he thought they made a good pair and anyone who had a problem with it could take it up with him. "You have good friends," Talise said one evening as they sat on the porch of Sarah's boarding house watching the sun set over the mountains. "We have good friends," Rand corrected. "They are yours too now." "Ours," Talise agreed, and the word felt warm and right in her mouth. 6 months after that conversation by the creek, on a bright spring day in 1879, Randall Lawson and Talise were married by a traveling preacher in a simple ceremony at Sarah Bright Wing's boarding house. Talise wore a white dress that Mrs. Shepherd had helped her sew, and Rand wore his best suit with his hair slicked back and his eyes shining with happiness. Senora Morales provided the food, and half the town showed up to celebrate, which both surprised and moved Talise deeply. She had expected judgment and condemnation, but instead she found acceptance and joy. "You are family now," Sarah told her as they stood in the kitchen after the ceremony, watching through the window as Rand laughed at something one of the ranch hands was saying. "This town is your home and these people are your people. Not all of them, but enough. And that is all anyone really needs." Talise squeezed her friend's hand, too full of emotion to speak. Rand had spent the previous month building them a small house on that same piece of land where he had first pitched the tent to nurse her back to health. It was simple but sturdy, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace and windows that looked out toward the mountains. He carried her over the threshold that night while she laughed and protested that it was not necessary, and then he set her down in the middle of their new home and kissed her breathless. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," he murmured against her lips, and Talise felt her heart swell with so much love she thought it might burst. Their first year of marriage was not without its challenges. There were still people who disapproved, who made rude comments or refused to serve them in certain establishments. There were moments when Talise felt the weight of 2 worlds pressing down on her, the world she had been born into, and the world she had chosen to join, and wondered if she would ever truly belong in either. But Rand was steady through all of it, his love unwavering, and gradually Talise learned that maybe belonging was not about fitting perfectly into one world or the other, but about building your own world with the people you chose to love. She continued working at the restaurant, and Rand continued working cattle, and together they built a life that was simple but full. They planted a garden that first spring, and Talise taught Rand some of the Apache farming techniques she remembered from childhood. They adopted a stray dog that showed up on their doorstep one day, half-starved and wary, and Rand joked that the dog was just like Talise, wounded and alone, until someone gave it a reason to trust. "Except you are much prettier," he added quickly, and Talise threw a dish towel at him while the dog wagged its tail between them. In the autumn of 1880, Talise discovered she was pregnant. She told Rand on a Sunday afternoon as they sat together on the porch he had built, watching the golden light of late day paint the mountains copper and gold. For a moment he just stared at her, and then a slow smile spread across his face. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Talise confirmed and found herself laughing at the sheer joy on his face. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Rand pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Talise, I am more than happy. I do not even have words for what I am. Grateful, blessed, terrified." "Terrified?" Talise pulled back to look at him. "Of what? Of being a father, of doing it wrong, of not being good enough." He touched her still flat stomach with gentle reverence. "This is a person we are going to be responsible for, a whole entire person." "You will be a wonderful father," Talise said with complete certainty. "You are patient and kind and good. Our child will be lucky to have you." "Our child will be lucky to have you," Rand countered. "You are the strongest person I know, Talise. If our baby gets even half of your strength and half of your heart, they will be able to face anything this world throws at them." Their son was born in May of 1881, during a late spring storm that rattled the windows and made the whole house feel small and precarious. Sarah Bright Wing attended the birth, and so did Senora Morales, and between the 2 of them they guided Talise through the long hours of labor while Rand paced holes in the floor of the other room. When it was finally over and Sarah emerged to tell him he had a son, Rand burst into the bedroom looking wild-eyed and overwhelmed. "Is she all right?" were his first words, and Talise loved him even more for that. "I am fine," she said tiredly from the bed. "Come meet your son." Rand approached slowly, almost reverently, and when Talise placed the tiny bundle in his arms, she watched his entire face transform. "He is so small," Rand whispered, cradling the baby against his chest. "And perfect. Talise, he is perfect." "He is ours," Talise said, and felt tears slide down her cheeks. "He is ours, and he is safe, and he is going to have a good life. We will make sure of it." They named him Thomas after Rand's father, but from the beginning they called him Tommy. He was a healthy baby with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes. And Talise had never known it was possible to love someone as much as she loved that tiny person. She would hold him for hours, watching him sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes, and feel a fierce protective love that dwarfed everything else she had ever felt. Rand was a devoted father, taking to parenthood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. He would walk the floor with Tommy in the middle of the night when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice until Tommy settled. He built a cradle with his own hands, smooth and sturdy, and rocked it gently whenever he sat beside it. And when Talise felt overwhelmed and exhausted, which happened more than she cared to admit in those early months, Rand would take Tommy and tell her to rest, and she would wake hours later to find her husband and son both asleep in the rocking chair by the window. Life settled into a new rhythm after Tommy's birth. Talise stopped working at the restaurant, at least for a while, and focused on caring for their son and their home. Rand continued working cattle but took fewer overnight trips, unwilling to be away from his family for extended periods. They had friends over for Sunday dinners, Sarah and Senora Morales and others from town who had become important to them, and Tommy was passed around and cooed over and loved by everyone who met him. "He is going to grow up thinking he is the center of the universe," Rand joked one evening after a particularly busy dinner party. "Good," Talise said firmly. "He should feel loved and wanted. He should never doubt that he belongs." Rand understood what she was not saying, that their son would face challenges because of who his parents were, that he would exist between worlds just as Talise did, that he would need all the love and confidence they could give him to navigate that complexity. "He will," Rand promised. "We will make sure of it." The years that followed were good ones. Tommy grew from a baby into a curious, energetic toddler who kept them both constantly on their toes. He learned to walk early, much to Rand's pride and Talise's slight alarm, and he was fearless in a way that made his mother's heart skip. He would climb anything, explore anything, and had absolutely no sense of danger. Rand built him a wooden horse that Tommy rode around the yard for hours, pretending to be a cowboy like his father, and Talise taught him the Apache words for animals and plants and the world around them. "You want him to know both sides," Sarah observed one day as she watched Talise teaching Tommy the word for bird. "I want him to be proud of both sides," Talise corrected. "I want him to know where he comes from, all of where he comes from. The world is going to tell him he is one thing or another. I want him to know he can be both." In 1884, when Tommy was 3 years old, Talise discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news felt less frightening and more exciting, as if they were old hands at this parenting thing now. Rand was delighted, hoping out loud for a daughter who would look just like her mother. And Tommy was simply confused about why his mother's stomach was growing, and what it meant when they told him he was going to be a big brother. Their daughter was born in February of 1885, during a cold snap that turned the world outside their windows into a wonderland of ice and snow. The birth was easier than Tommy's had been, and when Rand held his daughter for the first time, Talise saw tears slide down his weathered cheeks. "She looks like you," he said in wonder, studying the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. "She has your eyes." "She has your nose," Talise countered, though it was hard to tell with babies. "What should we call her?" They had discussed names but never settled on one they both loved completely. Now, holding their daughter, Rand said quietly, "What about Rose? My mother's name was Rose, and this little one is beautiful like a flower." "Rose," Talise repeated, testing the sound of it. "Rose Lawson. Yes, I like it." Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister, though his fascination sometimes manifested in ways that required close supervision. He wanted to hold her constantly, and he would bring her his favorite toys and seem genuinely puzzled when she was too young to play with them. "When will she be big?" he would ask repeatedly, and Talise would laugh and tell him to be patient. Raising two children was exponentially more challenging than raising one, but Talise and Rand worked together seamlessly. They had learned each other's rhythms over the years, learned when to step in and when to step back, learned how to communicate with just a look or a touch. Their love had deepened and matured, becoming something steady and enduring, the kind of love that could weather storms because it was built on genuine friendship and respect. "You ever regret it?" Rand asked one night as they sat together after the children were finally asleep. "Staying here, marrying me, building this life. Do you ever wish you had gone back to your people?" Talise considered the question seriously. "I miss things," she said honestly. "I miss the language and the stories and the feeling of being surrounded by people who understand without explanation. But regret? No. My people are scattered, Rand. The world we knew is gone. I can mourn that and still choose to build something new, and what I have built here with you," she reached for his hand. "This is good. This is real. This is ours. I would not trade it for anything." Rand brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I love you, Talise Lawson. Have I told you that today?" "Only twice," Talise teased, "but I do not mind hearing it again." "I love you," Rand said obediently, and then he was kissing her properly, and Talise thought that this, right here, was what happiness felt like. The children grew, and the years passed with a speed that sometimes took Talise's breath away. Tommy started school in Montana City when he turned 6, and though there were a few incidents with other children saying cruel things about his mother's heritage, he learned to stand up for himself and for his family. He was smart and quick, and had inherited both his mother's determination and his father's steady temperament. Rose was 2 years behind him in school, but she was arguably even brighter, with a fierce intelligence and a stubborn streak that Talise recognized as her own. By 1890, Montana City had grown from a rough frontier town into something more established. There was talk of Montana becoming a state, and the railroad had come through, bringing with it more people and more commerce. The Wild West that Rand had known as a young man was fading into something different, something more civilized but also more complicated. Yet through all the changes, Talise and Rand's life remained steady. They still lived in the house he had built for her, though they had added onto it over the years as their family grew. Talise had returned to working at the restaurant part-time once Rose started school, and Rand had been promoted to foreman at the ranch, which meant better pay and more respect. "We have done all right, have we not?" Rand said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set in shades of orange and purple. Tommy and Rose were playing in the yard, their laughter floating up to their parents like music. "We have done more than all right," Talise replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We have built something good, Something that will last. Something to be proud of, Rand agreed and slipped his arm around her waist. In the spring of 1891, tragedy struck when Sarah Brightwing passed away suddenly from a heart ailment. Talise was devastated. Sarah had been more than a friend. She had been a mentor and a mother figure, and a link to the native world that Talise sometimes felt cut off from. The funeral was well attended, and Talise spoke through her tears about how much Sarah had meant to her, how Sarah had welcomed her when others would not, how Sarah had taught her that it was possible to exist in two worlds without losing yourself. She would be proud of you, Rand told her that night as they lay in bed, Talise still crying softly into her pillow. She would be proud of everything you have accomplished, everything you have become. I hope so, Talise whispered. I hope she knew how much she meant to me. She knew, Rand said with certainty. Trust me, she knew. Sarah's death reminded Talise of how precious and fragile life was, how important it was to hold tight to the people you loved. She made a conscious effort after that to tell Rand and the children how much she loved them every single day, to create memories that would last, to build a legacy of love and strength that would outlive her. Tommy turned 10 in 1891, and Rose turned 8, and they were both growing so fast that Talise sometimes felt dizzy trying to keep up. Tommy had started talking about wanting to be a rancher like his father, and he would follow Rand around on weekends, learning everything he could about horses and cattle and the land. Rose, meanwhile, had announced her intention to become a teacher, and she spent her free time reading every book she could get her hands on and helping the younger children at school with their lessons. We made good humans, Rand observed proudly one Sunday as they watched Tommy expertly saddle a horse while Rose sat nearby with her nose buried in a book. Smart, capable humans who are going to change the world. Or at least their corner of it, Talise agreed, smiling. In 1893, Talise received unexpected news that some of her mother's relatives had been located on a reservation in Arizona, and that they wanted to meet her. The letter, delivered through a complex series of contacts and intermediaries, filled Talise with a mix of emotions she could not quite articulate. She had thought all her immediate family connections were lost, and discovering that some remained felt like a gift and a burden all at once. "Do you want to go?" Rand asked after she showed him the letter. "I could get time off from the ranch. We could take the children, make it a family trip." Talise thought about it for a long time before answering. "Yes," she said finally. "I want them to know where they come from. I want Tommy and Rose to meet their relatives, to understand that part of their heritage. And I want to see them again, the ones who survived. I want to tell them about my life, about how I found happiness even after everything we lost." So in the summer of 1893, the Lawson family made the long journey south to Arizona. It was a difficult trip, days of travel by train and then wagon, but when they finally arrived at the reservation, and Talise was reunited with her aunt, and two cousins she had not seen since childhood, it felt worth every hardship. There were tears and embraces and long conversations in a mixture of Apache and English, and Talise felt a part of herself that had been closed off for years finally open up again. Her relatives were wary of Rand at first, but his genuine respect and his clear devotion to Talise eventually won them over. They were fascinated by Tommy and Rose, these children who existed between worlds, and they taught them things that Talise had forgotten or never known how to explain. Tommy learned traditional dances and songs, and Rose learned about the plants and their medicinal uses. And both children absorbed everything with the hunger of young people discovering a part of themselves they had not known was missing. "Thank you for bringing them," Talise's aunt said on their last evening there. Thank you for keeping our blood alive, for teaching them who they are. The world tried to erase us, but you have made sure we continue. They are the future, Talise said, watching her children dance around the evening fire with their cousins. They will carry both worlds forward, and they will be stronger for it. The journey back to Montana was quieter, all four of them processing what they had experienced. But there was a new peace in Talise, a sense of completion she had not felt before. She had built a bridge between her past and her present, and she had shown her children that they came from strength and resilience and survival. That was a gift she had not known she could give. As the children grew into teenagers, they continued to make their parents proud. Tommy became skilled in ranching and often worked alongside his father, earning respect from the other ranch hands despite his young age. Rose excelled in her studies and began assisting the town schoolteacher, confirming her calling to education. Both children navigated the complexities of their mixed heritage with grace, standing firm against prejudice while building bridges with people willing to see past surface differences. In 1898, when Tommy turned 17 and Rose 15, Rand and Talise celebrated 20 years of marriage. The anniversary party, held at their home, was attended by what felt like half of Montana City, testament to the place they had carved out for themselves and their family in the community. Mrs. Shepard brought a beautiful cake. Senora Morales provided enough food to feed an army, and the sheriff made a speech about how Rand and Talise had shown the town what true love and commitment looked like. 20 years, Rand said that night after everyone had gone home and they were cleaning up together. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Talise said, pausing to look around at their home, at the life they had built. Sometimes I still see that girl collapsed against the cottonwood tree, bleeding and certain she was going to die. And then I look at all of this, at you, at our children, at our friends and our home, and I cannot quite believe it is real. It is real, Rand said, pulling her close. All of it is real. You survived, Talise. You did more than survive, you thrived. We built something beautiful out of pain and loss and fear. That is real, and it is ours, and I am grateful for every single day of it. Talise kissed him, pouring 20 years of love and gratitude and partnership into the gesture. So am I, she whispered. So am I. The new century arrived with celebration and hope. Tommy, now 19, had decided to work full-time at the ranch with an eye toward eventually buying his own land. He had been courting a girl from town, a sweet young woman named Margaret, who was the daughter of the blacksmith, and Rand and Talise both approved of the match. Rose, at 17, had been offered a position as assistant teacher at the Montana City School, making her one of the youngest teachers in the territory and a source of immense pride to her parents. They are going to be fine, Talise said one evening as she and Rand watched their children from the porch, Tommy teaching Rose how to rope a fence post while they both laughed. We raised them right. They are going to have good lives. They are, Rand agreed, because they had you as a mother. You taught them to be strong and proud and compassionate. You taught them that love is more important than hate, that building is more important than destroying. Everything good in them comes from you. And from you, Talise corrected. You taught them integrity and hard work and how to treat people with respect. We did this together, Rand. Every bit of it. In the fall of 1900, Tommy married Margaret in a ceremony that rivaled Rand and Talise's own wedding in its warmth and joy. Watching her son pledge his life to someone he loved, seeing the way he looked at Margaret with such devotion, made Talise's heart full. This was what she and Rand had fought for, worked for, built toward a future where their children could love freely and openly, where they could build their own lives without fear. Rose continued to flourish as a teacher, becoming beloved by her students and respected by their parents. She had inherited her mother's fierce intelligence and her father's patient teaching style, and the combination made her remarkably effective. In 1902, she met a young lawyer named David Preston, who had recently moved to Montana City to set up practice, and within 6 months they were engaged. 2 weddings in 3 years, Rand said with mock weariness as they planned Rose's ceremony. "We are going to be poor. We are going to be happy," Talise corrected. "Our children are building good lives with good people. That is worth any amount of money." Rose's wedding in the spring of 1903 was beautiful, and Talise cried through the entire ceremony, overwhelmed by joy and nostalgia, and the bittersweet recognition that her babies were fully grown now, starting families of their own. But she also felt proud and satisfied, knowing that she and Rand had given their children the tools they needed to build happy, meaningful lives. In 1904, Tommy and Margaret had their first child, a boy they named Randall after his grandfather. Becoming grandparents was a joy that Rand and Talise had not fully anticipated, and they spent hours doting on little Randall, marveling at how much he looked like Tommy had as a baby. The following year, Rose and David had a daughter they named Sarah, after Sarah Brightwing, and Talise wept at the honor of her friend being remembered in this way. "We have grandchildren," Rand said wonderingly one evening as they babysat both infants while their parents enjoyed a rare evening out. "When did we get old enough to have grandchildren?" "We are not old," Talise protested, though she was in her mid-40s now and definitely felt the years in her joints. "We are experienced. There is a difference." "Experienced," Rand repeated with a grin. "I like that. Makes us sound distinguished." They were distinguished in their way. Rand had become one of the most respected ranchers in the region, known for his fairness and expertise. Talise had taken over full management of Senora Morales's restaurant after the older woman retired, and it had flourished under her leadership. They were pillars of the Montana City community, living proof that love and determination could overcome prejudice and hardship. The years continued to unfold gently. More grandchildren arrived. Tommy and Margaret had 3 more children, and Rose and David had 2 more, and Rand and Talise's house was frequently full of noise and laughter, and the happy chaos of a large family. They had built something that would outlast them, a legacy of love and strength that would continue through their children and grandchildren and beyond. In the summer of 1910, Rand and Talise celebrated 30 years of marriage. They were in their late 50s now, with silver threading through their hair and lines etched deep around their eyes from years of laughter and sun. But they still loved each other with the same intensity they had felt as young people, that love merely deepened and enriched by 3 decades of partnership. "You remember that first day?" Rand asked as they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. "When I found you by that cottonwood tree, I remember everything," Talise said softly. "I remember being certain I was going to die. I remember you stopping when you could have kept riding. I remember you asking if you could help me, not just doing it but asking, treating me like I had a choice. I remember thinking you were either the kindest man I had ever met or the most foolish." "Maybe I was both," Rand said with a slight smile. "But I have never regretted stopping, not for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Talise. These 30 years with you have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," Talise said, and meant it with her whole heart. "You healed my wounds, Rand. The ones on the outside and the ones on the inside. You gave me a life I never thought I could have. You gave me love and children and a home and a future. You gave me everything." "You gave me just as much," Rand insisted. You taught me what real strength looks like. You showed me that love is about choosing someone every day, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. You made me a better man, Talise. Everything good in my life came from that day I decided to stop and help a wounded Apache woman by the side of the trail. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands intertwined, watching as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. The sounds of their grandchildren playing in the yard floated up to them, a reminder of all they had built together. Inside the house, Tommy and Rose were helping prepare dinner, their voices mingling with those of their spouses in easy conversation. This was family. This was home. This was love. "You think we will get another 30 years?" Talise asked quietly. "I plan on it," Rand said firmly. "I am not going anywhere, and neither are you. We have grandchildren to spoil and great-grandchildren to meet someday. We have work to do yet." "More work," Talise said with a laugh. "After everything we have already accomplished, you want to do more. With you, always." Rand brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Every day with you is a gift, Talise Lawson. I want as many of those days as I can get." As the summer evening deepened into night, and their family called them inside for dinner, Talise reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her here. She had been a wounded girl certain she would die alone, and she had become a woman with a husband she adored, children she was proud of, grandchildren who brought her joy, and a community that respected her. She had survived loss and pain and prejudice, and she had built something beautiful from the ashes of everything she had lost. It had started with one man making the choice to stop and help, to see past skin color and cultural difference to the human being who needed him. It had continued with two people choosing to trust each other, to build bridges instead of walls, to love despite all the reasons they could have chosen hate. And it had become a legacy of family and friendship and enduring love that would ripple outward for generations. Talise stood and pulled Rand to his feet, and together they walked into the warmth and light of their home, surrounded by the people they loved most in the world. Behind them, the Montana sky stretched vast and infinite, studded with stars that had witnessed their entire journey from that first desperate meeting to this moment of complete fulfillment. The Wild West they had known was fading into history, but what they had created together would endure. Love always did, if you tended it carefully and gave it room to grow. And Talise, who had once been certain her story would end in blood and dust beneath a cottonwood tree, had instead written herself a different ending entirely. One filled with joy and purpose and the kind of deep, abiding love that heals all wounds and makes anything possible. She had her cowboy and he had her, and together they had built something that would last forever.